friends. I hope you're having a great day. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Emma Carrington. I know we have some new subscribers and a lot of you came here for information on baby Charlie Mullale's case. I want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to Charlie's case and signing the petition. It seems to be starting to pay off. The Attorney General, the Minister for Police and the Minister for Women, along with the Children's Commissioner for Victims of Crime, have agreed to meet with Tamika and the family today. Today's the 10th of March because I'm late in recording. So I'll be keeping an eye out for any updates from Matt. And as soon as I know anything, I'll let you know what I find out. But please keep the Mullale family in your thoughts and hopefully they have a positive outcome from today's meeting. Now, disclaimer time. If you've been here before, you will know that we discuss true crime cases of domestic abuse and domestic homicide on this channel. This case also involves sexual assault. So if any of that is not something that you can watch right now, I totally understand. Thanks for stopping by. On the other hand, if you are interested in true crime and justice, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button because we'd love to have you join us. Okay then, I hope you are settled in and ready for today's case because we have a doozy. Today we are going to be discussing the case of Lorena Bobbitt. So if the name Lorena Bobbitt sounds familiar to you, you probably have a good idea of how this case ends. But there's more to the story than the punchline. That is John Wayne Bobbitt and his Johnson. So let's start at the beginning. Lorena Gallo is an Ecuadorian-born Venezuelan who emigrated to the US in 1987. She'd dreamed of being an American since she was young. She thought it was the land of dreams, where even the Flintstones had a microwave and they're middle class. This is something she was quoted as saying in an interview with Vanity Fair. Lorena was raised in a very strict but loving Catholic home. Her family were quite poor while Lorena was growing up, so when it came to her 15th birthday, they really didn't have the money to throw a lavish quinceañera. So Lorena asked instead for a trip to America the following year. This trip only reinforced her love for the States, and from that point on, she wanted the American dream. She wanted to be an American. She finished high school and applied for a student visa. She enrolled in a community college, and initially her whole family were going to immigrate with her. But I think it was her father wasn't able to get a visa for whatever reason. So she was 17 and she begged her mum and said, please, this is what I want. This is where I want to be. And she eventually relented and left her 17-year-old daughter in the United States and went home to Venezuela with the rest of her family. And Lorena, as well as going to community college, she worked part-time to support herself. She studied English as a second language. She also learnt a lot of her English from television shows, things like Days of Our Lives and The Price is Right. So much fun. Lorena was living with family friends, the Castros, who had daughters around her age. And this household was just as strict as the one she'd grown up in. This family, like her own, were very strict Catholics. While living with the Castros, the family went to visit relatives in Stafford, Virginia, a small town near the Quantico Marine Base, and Lorena went along with them. That evening, Mrs. Castro's niece took Lorena to a club for enlisted men. This is where she first met John Wayne Bobbitt. So who is John Bobbitt? John was born in Buffalo, New York on the 23rd of March in 1967. His father up and left the family early in John's life, so he really didn't know his father at all. His mother was an addict and not capable of caring for her 3 sons, so they were taken in by an aunt and uncle. They were raised alongside their own boys, and John often refers to his cousins as his brothers. John also often says that his life wasn't much improved by this move. He says that he and his brothers were subjected to abuse by another uncle at this time. John ended up joining the Marines, and when he was asked about how he'd come to sign up, he basically said, my friends were doing it, so I thought I'd go along too. Way to make life decisions. So that is how John Bobbitt wound up at the Marine Ball where he met Lorena in 1988. Lorena thought that John was very handsome in his dress blues, and he says that when he first saw her, he thought that she was beautiful. She seemed very quiet and timid, and even though she spoke very little English, he asked for her number. He then began coming around to see Lorena, and though Mrs. Castro reserved her judgment of John, neither of her daughters liked him. Because of her strict Catholic upbringing and the fact that John was Lorena's first romantic love interest, all of their dates were chaperoned. The Castro girls have said that they were picking up on some red flags early on. John always seemed to forget his wallet, so Lorena always paid. He would drink a lot when they would go out, and they didn't like the way he treated Lorena. But to Lorena, he could do no wrong. She was infatuated. Her friend and employer at the time, Jana, said to her he was Tom Cruise. Now, just to be clear, that was a good thing back then. Lorena says that they were at a swimming pool on the Marine base one day, and John found a ring at the bottom of the pool, and he got out and proposed to her with it. She laughed and said, "Don't ask me that if you're not serious." And he says, "I am serious." So they were married on the 18th of June. Now, John has a completely different story. He says that Lorena proposed to him, and it was because she was going to have to go back to Venezuela, that her visa was coming to an end, which was not the case. She didn't need him to stay in the country, but this is his version of events. So they were married on the 18th of June in 1989 by a justice of the peace. There are varying reports saying this was 7 months or 9 months after they first met. I'm waving my red flag. Either way, can we all agree that there's no way to know a person well enough to marry them in 7 months, 9 months? I'm sure there are relationships that have worked out even though they married quickly, but more often than not, that is not the case. I'm just saying. Now, according to Lorena, the physical abuse started after only about a month of being married. She had gone out with John and his cousin, and though both men were drunk, John decided to drive home. He was speeding and weaving all over the road, and when Lorena asked him to slow down, he laughed and continued. She grabbed the steering wheel to correct the vehicle at one point, and John punched her, leaving her winded. When they got home and they went inside, Lorena was crying. John then, allegedly, grabbed her by her hair, slapped her, then kicked her into the wall before saying, "I told you to stop crying." The next minute, there was an officer at the door. Apparently, John's demeanour changed in an instant. He was suddenly composed and mild-mannered, telling the officer that they just had an argument, that they were just having a little discussion like husband and wife. The officer asked if Lorena had a place to go, and she said, "No, but I'll go anyway." That night, she ended up sleeping in her car outside of the nail salon where she worked. She didn't tell anyone about the events of the night before. She was embarrassed and in shock. What had happened to the man that she'd fallen in love with? He had chosen his victim well. Lorena had no family nearby. She also had no close friends to confide in. She couldn't believe that this was a permanent change in him. She convinced herself that this was a one-off situation and went back. The next 4 years just got increasingly worse and worse. John was mean and demeaning to Lorena. Allegedly, he had started breaking her down, telling her that no one else would want her or treat her well, that she was ugly and undeserving. Witnesses said that he was seen around town belittling her, shoving her, pulling her hair and choking her. Now, for those who don't know, a spouse who chokes their significant other is 7 to 10 times more likely to kill them. So this is definitely not to be taken lightly, and he's doing these things in public. John was discharged from the Marine Corps not long after they were married. He was a big drinker and struggled to hold down a job. He also seemed to always have people coming to stay with them. Their first apartment was a studio, and they came home from visiting John's family just a week or so after the wedding, and John's cousin came back with them. When Lorena asked what was going on, John announced that his cousin was moving in with them. She was shocked. Their place was barely big enough for the two of them, and they didn't even have any furniture. But that didn't stop John's cousin bunking down in the opposite corner of the same room as them. Completely conducive to a newlywed couple. And John wondered why Lorena wasn't comfortable getting amorous in the situation. He's no real bright spark. John may not have had a sex partner, but he was happy that he had a live-in drinking buddy. So while Lorena worked 2 jobs, during the day as a nanny for Jana, then once the day had finished at Jana's home, she went to work at one of her nail salons and worked as a manicurist. So she was busting a butt, and he wasn't even pulling his weight. He was just going out most nights and drinking. Many people gave accounts of the bruises that they'd seen on Lorena's face and wrists. Through this time, they were noticing when she wore heavy makeup to hide the marks. Lorena says she knew of a number of affairs her husband had. She said she confronted a woman that John was seeing in their apartment complex, saying that she just wanted her to know that she, Lorena, was real and to show her her ring. The woman quickly broke off the affair with John after this. John was also verbally and psychologically abusing his wife. Often their neighbours heard him yelling and belittling her along with the thumps and crashes. They were at a Christmas celebration one year and John handed her a small gift in front of her family friends, the Castros. He prompted her to open it, and when she did, she found a skimpy pair of underwear. This embarrassed the conservative Lorena, so she tucked them behind her on her chair, and John pressed his wife, saying, "What's wrong?" Lorena, not wanting to make a scene, got up to move away from the rest of the guests, and John was quick to follow. One of Mrs. Castro's daughters says she saw John grab Lorena, twisting her arm and mocking her until he noticed the other woman standing nearby. The arm twisting was something Lorena explained as a torture method that John said he'd taught in the Marines. This was apparently a go-to move that he had for her wrists and ankles. What all these people didn't see, however, was what was actually happening behind closed doors. According to Lorena, John had taken to raping his wife. He would hold her down and forcibly enter her. He did this not only vaginally, but also anally. No consent, often no warning, and definitely no lubrication. One of these attacks was brought on by Lorena saying she would prefer a plastic Christmas tree to a real one because then they'd only have to buy it once. John allegedly kicked her to the floor, began punching her, then pulled up her skirt as she tried to get away before raping her. Lorena also says of the first time she was anally raped that it was brought on by her complaining that the TV was too loud. This poor excuse for a man is a repulsive pig. John would apparently discuss his predilection for forcible sex with a couple of younger men that he played basketball with around the apartment complex. He told them that he liked to hold women down and make them scream and squirm away, that it turned him on. I have no words. If that's your thing, all well and good, but do it with a consenting partner. It's really as simple as that. Now, in this time, Lorena got pregnant, and despite her relationship being what it was, she was excited. She hoped that this would settle John down and be the start of the family that she'd always dreamed of. This, however, would prove not to be the case. John was not pleased at all. He lost it. He asked her what she was thinking, telling her she couldn't be a mum and berating her, saying that she would be a terrible mother. He told her that they weren't in a financial position to have a child. Sorry, that'd be because you won't get a job, douche canoe. Moving forward. Lorena says he told her that she would have to have an abortion. In fact, she says his exact words were, she would have to go where bad girls go. Lorena was horrified. She was Catholic. This was something she would never have considered and told him so. John wasn't having it. He told her in no uncertain terms that it was the baby or him, which is a no-brainer for me. But again, this was a different time. So John threatened to divorce her and told her she would get no help from him. Lorena explains that she didn't want a child growing up without a father. She came from a family where her parents were together and loving, that was what she was used to, and she wanted her marriage to work. So John convinced Lorena to get the abortion. Well, convinced, coerced, threatened, same deal, right? She felt she had no choice. When they went in for the procedure, Lorena describes how John took delight in taunting her while they sat in the waiting room. He was scaring her, telling her how big the needles were going to be and that she was going to die. He then sat there laughing at her while she was crying and shaking beside him, to the point that a nurse came over to see what was going on and took Lorena into another room so she could get away from him and try to settle down before they took her in. This guy, seriously, he's a piece of shit. There, I said it. I could sit here for hours and tell you one instance of abuse after another that Lorena has alleged. And I have to say alleged, but I don't doubt her for a moment. Everything that Lorena has said from her time being married to John, but it would take all day. So suffice it to say, he was a monumental cretin and a bunch of red flags in the shape of a person. I can't even bring myself to call him a man. So in October of 1991, John left for a year. They separated and the bank moved to foreclose on their house. So Lorena went back to live with Mrs. Castro. Now in this time, unbeknownst to Lorena, John fathered a child with a woman he was seeing in New York. When that relationship didn't pan out, he made his way back to Lorena. And like so many other victims of domestic violence do, she reconciled with him, hoping that this time it would be better. But it wasn't. John was still as brutal, verbally, physically, and sexually. John taunted her about the affair that he'd had, telling her that she was ugly, making derogatory remarks about her body. When Lorena tried to leave, he would pull the same stunts he had been from the beginning, telling her that no one would treat her well and that she didn't deserve him. He would also use racial slurs and tell her that she didn't deserve to be in America. He would take her immigration and visa papers and threaten that he would get her deported. Lorena decided to tape record John secretly, so she bought a micro cassette recorder and hid it in her purse. She would turn it on when he started one of his tirades, and she said she did this to show friends how abusive John had been and also to gather possible evidence for a divorce. But John found the tape recorder in her purse one day. He took out the cassette and destroyed it. This, of course, caused a fight, and Lorena says he once again pushed her, hit her, kicked her, and raped her. One Thanksgiving, while Lorena's mum was visiting, John was putting his best foot forward. You know, sucking up, being all sweet and helpful in the kitchen, but he also had the game on. Well, Lorena wanted her mum to see the parade, so she switched the channel. That remote might as well have controlled John as well, because he lost it. He went up onto the roof and disconnected the antenna for the TV. Smidge of an overreaction. Then when she and her mum decided to go see a movie, he took her car keys. And just for good measure, he disabled her car. So instead of arguing, she decided to take his car. At this point, she's just trying to get away from him. But he was having none of it. He raced out to get into his car and knocked her over with the car as he sped away like a twit, allegedly. But poor Lorena, because her mum didn't know all that she'd been going through, she was hiding it like the majority of victims do. Her mum says, "Why would you upset him like that?" Which just meant that Lorena ended up thinking, maybe I am in the wrong. Poor darling. Now, I haven't pointed out all the big red flags because I hope by now we all know that any sort of physical violence is not okay. Sex without consent, even within a marriage, is rape and not okay. But I've got my flags out here because these are generally the ones that we don't see for what they are. The overreacting over something insignificant, controlling the environment, having to have control of the channel when that was threatened, then taking the ultimate control by disconnecting it. And then there's not letting her leave, tampering with her car. None of this is okay. Everyone is entitled to autonomy. So flags, flags, flags. Okay, I'm done. Where were we? In 1993, John told Lorena that his friend Robbie was going to be staying with them for a few weeks. But when Robbie got there, John prepared to build him a room in the living area, like cordon off a section. And Lorena figured he'd be staying on the lounge, seeing as it was only for a few weeks. However, when she said as much, Robbie said, "What? You said I could live here." John didn't consider anyone. He just did what he wanted to do. It wasn't long after Robbie moved in that Lorena had decided that she wanted a divorce. And this was apparently something that she and John had discussed and actually agreed on. Lorena was struggling. She was shaking and crying all the time. She was getting complaints about her work at the nail salon when she'd never previously had a problem. Lorena was scared. John had told her that even after they were divorced, that he would follow her, that he would have quote unquote sex with her whenever he wanted. But the night of June 23rd, 1993 was the last night that John would lay his hands on his soon-to-be ex-wife. He'd gone out drinking with Robbie in the early afternoon, so when Lorena came home from work, she settled in for a night of solitude. She went to bed dressed in a pair of short cotton tights, like bike pants, we used to call them back in the day, and a t-shirt. At around 3:30, she's woken by the slamming of the front door. Of course, because John's Mr. Consideration Plus. And the next thing she knows, John is on top of her. She struggles to push him off, saying, "No, get off me, I don't want to have sex." But that really was of no consequence to John. He pushed his upper body into hers, trapping her against the mattress while he tore at her underwear. When he finally rolled off her, she asked, "Why do you do this to me?" And he just pushed her away, saying, "Leave me alone." She got up, looking for her shorts, and she said, "You can't do this to me." And you did it again and again and again. All the while she was crying and he was telling her to leave him alone. Would have been nice if you'd taken your own advice. I'm sure she would have liked to have been left alone. So after this assault, Lorena made her way into the dark kitchen for a glass of water. And when she opened the fridge, the light shone on, there's a discrepancy. Some reports say 8-inch, some say 12-inch, a big kitchen knife with a red handle. And the light fell across this knife. So Lorena explains that her mind was swirling with images of the beatings and the rapes and the humiliations and the day at the clinic. And she picked up the knife and returned to the bedroom. She then pulled back the sheet and, lifting John's penis, she sliced it off. Lorena left the apartment with the knife in one hand and the appendage in the other. She jumped in her car and she drove to her work. And at one point she came to realize why she was having so much trouble steering. She was still holding on to John's penis. So she threw it out of her car window. Actually, she lobbed it over the car, apparently. When she arrived at the salon, she wasn't able to get in, and that was because she still had the knife in her hand. So she disposed of that in a bin, and then she went inside. She tried calling Jana, but there was no answer. So Lorena jumped back in her car and drove to her employer and friend's home. So it was in the wee hours of the morning that Jana's husband opened the door to a bloodied Lorena. Lorena tried to explain what had happened. She told them that she'd cut John, but it wasn't until she told them that she'd thrown it out the window that they completely understood. Jana called the police and took Lorena to the hospital for a rape kit. So back at the apartment, John was so intoxicated that he really wasn't aware of what had happened right away. He says he remembers thinking to himself that he'd better not go back to sleep or he'd be dead. Is that something you could go back to sleep after? Anyway, he must have laid there for a bit because there was quite a puddle of blood on the bed when the police went back later trying to locate the missing part. John finally did rouse himself though and went in to wake Robbie to take him to the hospital. Robbie, being just as inebriated as his mate, set about brushing his teeth for the outing. When they got to the hospital ER, the doctor asked to see his wrists because he was applying pressure and was all bloodied. And John calmly said, "That's not where I'm cut." Now, to hear John tell it, he wasn't drunk. He was very, very tired, but he wasn't drunk. He had had 3 beers and 2 shots, two B-52s. And I'm sorry, that sort of doesn't align, even just for the time frame for me. You've been out since, by all accounts, 2:30 in the afternoon until 3:30 in the morning. A person doesn't have 5 drinks while they're at bars and pubs and whatever over 12 hours. It's just a little suspect to me. So the doctors admitted him and sent for a surgeon. They also sent word to the police dispatch that someone needed to find the missing part. Of course, in the 90s, there were no mobile phones, or they weren't all that prevalent, and the media were always keeping their ear on police scanners for any noteworthy goings on. So these dispatch officers were delicately speaking in code, saying things like, "We're looking for an appendage, and we need to help restore a man's dignity." It was rather absurd. And the fact that John's dignity was in any way attached or related to his peni, sorry, no. Anyway, everyone was out looking for it. And when they found Lorena in the hospital, the first thing they asked her was, "Where is it?" And she told them. She told them that she had thrown it from the car by a 7-Eleven, and that is exactly where they found it, in a grassy plot field type thing. However, the officer who located it actually did this by stepping on it. Then he refused to pick it up. Men are such babies. He's just standing there going, "It's here, it's here." They finally found someone willing to get his hands dirty in order to salvage a man's dignity. And then they took it into 7-Eleven and put it on ice in a hot dog bag. No, I'm being serious. The appendage was then taken to the hospital and John was prepped and wheeled into surgery at around 6 a.m. And he was in surgery for over 9 hours. And when they came out, the surgeon was hopeful, but did warn John that there was still a chance that the organ could blacken and fall off. Spoiler alert, it didn't. So now, there were 2 accusations to answer, and this meant 2 trials. The first was the one of marital sexual assault. At the time of this trial, in Virginia, a rape conviction could mean a sentence of life, as could a conviction of marital rape. And you would think that what happened to Lorena was marital rape. Unfortunately, this is not the case. See, to charge someone with marital rape, the parties had to be separated and living in separate dwellings, and there had to be significant or permanent injury done. So, marital sexual assault it was. And the max sentence for this was 20 years. There were also stipulations put on this. The defence could only provide details of corroborating evidence from up to 5 days before the assault. So the many, many times that John had assaulted his wife could not be put before the jury. In saying that, because John was the stellar husband that he was, in those 5 days there was 1 other incident of rape and one that the courts and Lorena called consensual. The reason I say it this way is that under questioning, the defense asked why Lorena would have consensual sex with her husband just days after he had raped her. And she replied that she was scared if she didn't, he would rape her again, because that's what he always threatened her with. That there is threatening and coercion. And coercion negates consent. Okay, sorry, I'm stepping down from my soapbox. Okay, so this case has gone viral before viral was even a thing. It was worldwide news that this man had his business cut off. The media wasn't allowed in the courtroom because it was a sexual abuse trial, but that did not stop them from showing up in droves. It wasn't only the media though. There were people everywhere coming to get in on the spectacle, and poor Lorena's trauma was completely bypassed. All anyone cared about was this douche canoe and his peni. There were also people out the front of the courthouse selling souvenirs. They were selling t-shirts with Manassas, Virginia, a cut above the rest, emblazoned across the front, and chocolate penises with a red icing scar at the base. It was a circus, and at the end of it all, the jury found John Wayne Bobbitt not guilty. And I've got nothing to say about that. It'll only raise my blood pressure. So John was sent off to a ranch and told to lay low while waiting for Lorena's trial. But that really didn't last long. He wound up jetting across the country on a radio tour, cashing in on his newfound infamy and explaining that he'd met this lady friend and that everything was working a-okay. Yeah, we needed to know that. Thanks so much. On January 10th, 1994, Lorena's trial for malicious wounding began. Interestingly, the prosecutor who had just tried John months earlier was now tasked with trying Lorena. When he was asked if it was a conflict of interest, he was quite frank. He said no. He believed that John had raped Lorena, and he also believed that she was not justified in her actions. So it seemed a little sketchy, but in my opinion, he did a pretty good job. In fact, before they went to trial, he offered a plea deal, admit premeditation, and she would get 4 months in prison. But Lorena said, no way. There was no premeditation, and I'll take my chances with the jury. Because if she pled guilty, it would have been a felony, and she would never have been able to become an American citizen. And I can imagine, after all she'd been through, there was no way that she was going to let this poor excuse for a man, John, not the prosecutor, take that away from her too. So she says no. She was prepared to risk 20 years in prison to be able to have her say. And can we have a round of applause for this woman's strength? She knew she was going to be under a spotlight. This was going to be a circus. And she was going to have to rehash everything. And she stood tall and said, no, I'm going to have my say. So the trial began, and this time not only was all the prior abuse allowed in, but also the media. And this was right at the time of the 24-hour news cycle and court TV. Everything was just blowing up, and the trial was televised, and people watched. They watched for 2 weeks while people testified to the abuse they'd witnessed or the marks it had left on Lorena. Lorena's attorney argued that she'd had a brief psychotic breakdown brought on by years of spousal abuse and could not resist the impulse to maim her husband. So they were pleading not guilty by reason of temporary insanity. More than 4 dozen witnesses came forward with chilling accounts of John beating, pushing, kicking, and choking Lorena. They told the jury that he was relentless, that he would break down doors to get to her and drag her by her hair. When John took the stand, he denied ever hitting his wife. However, this was contradicted by a police report and the fact that he had pled guilty to domestic assault. He sat on the stand saying, I don't remember signing that. I don't remember saying that I ever hit her. I never hit her. He went on to say, no, I didn't plead guilty, even though the evidence of all of this was right in front of him. He also testified that he'd never raped Lorena, that he'd never told people that he liked forcible sex, even though the people that he'd told had taken the stand just days before to describe the conversations. Basically, he just sat there and lied through his teeth about everything. And despite his claims of innocence, even the 3-doctor panel that examined Lorena for the state concluded that she was a battered wife and that she had been raped by her husband moments before she cut him. While Lorena was on the stand, she broke down on numerous occasions while recounting the abuse that she'd endured throughout her marriage. And although they were there to try her for malicious wounding, everyone was seeing more and more clearly the vicious character of the victim in this case. Lorena struggled to express the depravity of the sexual acts perpetrated against her, both due to English being her second language, as well as the ingrained conservative beliefs she held, which made discussing such things difficult at the best of times, let alone in front of a room full of people and cameras that were there to broadcast these violations around the nation. And everyone was watching, but the media did little to advance the conversation about domestic abuse. They were solely focused on the penis. Now, in the 90s, talk shows were big, and there were tons of them. Oprah, Maury Popovich, Sally Jessy Raphael, Ricky Lake, and the list goes on. Everyone was weighing in on this. Even the stand-up comedians were adding the Bobbitts to their sets, the likes of Robin Williams and Whoopi Goldberg, as well as Saturday Night Live and Letterman. They were all making jokes. But while the world was laughing, Lorena was trying to deal with the trauma of the abuse and just get through her trial. So the end of the trial comes and the jury comes back with a verdict of not guilty due to temporary insanity. When the verdict came back, Lorena leant over to her attorney and asked, "Is that good?" And her attorney responded, "Yes, you're free." However, even though her legal team petitioned the courts for this to be the case, unfortunately, if a person is found not guilty due to even temporary insanity in Virginia, they're automatically detained for 45 days to undergo a psychiatric evaluation in the state hospital. So Lorena was surprised, after having been told moments before that she was free, to be taken straight to a facility. But she got some much needed help for her trauma while she was there and came out after those 45 days ready to move forward with her life. Now, you would think that would be the end of the story, but no, not by a long shot. While Lorena settled into a peaceful life of advocacy in the domestic violence sector and is in a long-term committed relationship with a man that she has a child with, who she met in the late 90s, John, John's a different story. John expanded his radio tour. He took it overseas. He went to Europe. He then made his way around the talk show circuit. Anyone who was paying, he'd talk to them. He was capitalizing. And while he was on this tour, he had his band with them. They were called the Severed Parts. Never heard of them? No, neither had I until I researched this case. And trust me, I didn't go as far as to listen to any of their music, so can't comment there. John was also the beneficiary of Howard Stern's Rotten New Year's Eve pageant in 1994. And if you don't know who Howard Stern is, all I can say is, lucky you. To be honest, I don't know a great deal about Howard Stern. However, I get that the times were completely different, but the way he handled this in particular, we're not copacetic. Anyway, I can't put any images here, but the gist of this telethon was to raise money for John to cover medical and legal bills. So there's John in his tux with all these people on phones taking donations, and up on the stage there is this giant penis. And when I say giant, I mean giant. I mean, it had to be 8-9 foot long, and it was raising every time they were checking in on the amount. So up goes this penis. It was truly disturbing. And what is most disturbing is that they raised almost $200,000 for this Nimrod. But wait, the lunacy does not stop there. Also in 1994, John filmed the first of two adult films. The first was called John Wayne Bobbitt Uncut. The second was after he decided to have a penis enlargement. Sir, you're lucky that thing works at all. I wouldn't be dicking around with it. Pun intended. Anyway, the second film was called Frankenpenis. No, I'm not kidding. In another interview with Howard Stern, after he starred in this second film, John said that he shouldn't have had the surgery, that he should have left it alone. You think? There was something else in that interview that I have to mention because it is a belief or an attitude that pisses me off. The delightful Howard says something along the lines of, I don't believe there was any rape. I mean, she's not that attractive. I wish this was a belief that was left in the 90s, but there are still people out there who believe rape is about sex. It's not. It's about dominance and violence. I once heard it said that rape is as close to sex as a punch in the face is to a kiss, which I think pretty much sums it up. Moving on. John has apparently been married and divorced 3 times and has been brought up on a number of domestic assault charges. Amazingly, with all his revenue raising from Severed Parts merch and appearances everywhere, John still had to file for bankruptcy. So the doctors who so miraculously attached his quote-unquote manhood never got paid. John is happy to speak out anytime he's asked for an interview and is still standing firm that he never assaulted his wife. He is quoted as saying, I don't believe she was a victim. No, she was greedy, selfish, and she was stubborn. Over the years, John has sent many letters and cards to Lorena, and it's just disgraceful. It's called post-separation abuse, and it's hideous when there's no escape. People ask, why don't you just leave? And I mean, this case went viral. It was everywhere. And this hideous person is still contacting the person who chopped off part of his body because of the way he treated her. And he still thinks that she wants to hear from him. It's just disgraceful. Anyway, from the last reports that I could find, John is living in Las Vegas. He's not working again after receiving a large payout from a car accident. He's also had another amputation in recent times. He has lost a toe from his right foot and is facing the potential loss of his left foot due to an infection that won't clear up. Lorena now goes by her maiden name of Gallo, and she has a foundation which I'll put a link to in the description box and show notes if you'd like more information about what she's doing or how you can help. She says, quote, one of my missions with my foundation is to educate the public and young women about the red flags in dating an abuser. She goes to colleges and she talks to sororities. Lorena knows that we've come a fair way from where we were as a society when her case was before the courts, but there are still so many loopholes that need to be closed. And she says she doesn't want to see another 25 years pass by and not be able to protect women more. So along with spending time with her family, she also spends her time volunteering in local shelters for victims of domestic violence in Northern Virginia. So that, my friends, is the disturbing case of Lorena and John Bobbitt. Thank you so much if you've made it this far. You are amazing. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and give this episode a big thumbs up for me. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on this one, ladies and gents. Do you think Lorena should have gone to prison? Should John have served time? Let me know what you think in the comments box below, or use the hashtag #TrappedByLove on social media so I can follow the conversation. If the content in this case has raised any concerns for you regarding your own relationship or that of a loved one, please reach out for help. There's a list of resources in the show notes and the description box below. My aim in covering these cases is to honour the victims of these crimes and to get their stories out there in the hopes of warning others who may face similar situations. The hope is that the more people who recognise the red flags and warning signs of abusive relationships, the less prevalent these cases will be in the future. We need to know what to be on the lookout for so we can protect ourselves and each other. I thank you again for joining me this week, and until next time, please take care of yourselves and be kind to one another.